This is TWiT.
Have a great GTC. Thank you all for coming.
I wonder whether he had a single sip of water.
Thank you.
He just simulated the water.
I mean, he did do pretty well considering he did the whole show himself.
Did the whole show himself. That's 2 hours of almost consistent and constant communication paired with no rehearsal, allegedly.
Or very little, not enough.
Yeah, not enough rehearsal. I think an impressive job. This has been...
So what do you think, Micah?
Yeah, the Nvidia GTC keynote. I think you nailed it at the beginning whenever you suggested that this was an opportunity for Nvidia to say, we've seen how y'all out there are getting very excited about what OpenAI is doing, what Microsoft is doing, what Google's doing, what all of these companies are doing. But don't forget, we're the behind the scenes folks that are helping make all of that possible. At the same, because this technology that is going to power the next set of whatever happens in AI, we may not have heard about otherwise, because those companies are buying it and then building the tools that we actually use on top of it. And that's the stuff that we as consumers see. So I think you're dead on in what this was meant to be. Outside of the weird math and jargon that was used a lot of the time, where that did not feel very much for us.
No, it was not at all. We were strangers in a strange land.
But I don't know. I appreciated seeing some of the technology in the sense that it, I've heard about digital twins before on the Microsoft Azure side, and not really conceptualizing what that meant outside of some just simulation to go, oh, if I was to build a factory here, what would that look like? This actually being the place where you're training these robots is a really cool idea. I think that makes sense. And then just overall, again, me as a person who has to talk about this stuff regularly, knowing some of the behind the scenes, knowing the spine, if we want to use one of the terms from the conference, is very helpful. I'm curious your thoughts in particular. You can mention or remind the listeners that the conversation that we had briefly about how the CEO of Nvidia kind of said this brings the end of the computer scientist to the forefront. What do you think about that?
So Huang said on some stage somewhere, I can't remember what it was, there's a video up online that just says that we don't need to train computer scientists anymore, probably overstated, but instead what matters is domain expertise. That if you're a doctor, that expertise is what matters. And that the machine, you can talk to the machine, and that's what is miraculous about AI. So it brings it to our level, which I think is real and is true. And I talk a lot about wanting to start a new program in internet studies, or call it internet and AI, or technology humanities. We've got to bring the humanities back into this. It's about humanity and how we interact with this. It's less about the technology. One thing I learned, and pardon me, I'm going to do a plug here in the Gutenberg parenthesis. See, I had to get it once this show. There it is. There it is. Is that after some time, the technologists and the technology fade into the scenery. Mm-hmm. And what matters is what we do with it. That was 150 years for print before we got the novel and the essay and newspaper. And I think it's going to happen here too, where both on the internet and in AI, of course we're going to need the technologists. You and I can't build this stuff.
Right.
And they're there. But what matters is what we do with it. And I think that's what he was really saying, is that here's an incredible tool set, and it's up to you what you do with it.
Go forth
so I welcome
and create
that attitude.
And
right?
do you think that this will happen at a more rapid pace than that 150 years? Or do you think it'll still take a long time?
I think it's going to take a long time. And this is what people argue with me about. Because I say that I think we have time. I think we still don't know what the internet is. We still don't know what AI is. We're seeing the future in the analog of the past. We haven't really reinvented things yet. If you look online, shows look like shows, and books look like books, and newspapers like newspapers. And I think it takes some time to reinvent this. Now, what he was trying to argue basically is we aren't going to generate that. His machines will. Yeah. I don't know about that. That bothers me. What struck me more than anything else, Micah, is scale. I have been arguing that the internet, the connected world, scales to such an extent that small matters now. That because everyone can connect to everyone, then small groups and small communities can find each other and do things. And I very much believe that.
Yeah.
And so scale matters to the extent that it makes small possible, big enough possible, big enough. So, okay, that's my cant that I'm using in the next book, The Web We Weave, out this fall from Basic Books. But here, the constant, I don't want to say drumbeat, the constant kind of jet noise of scale was somewhat overwhelming to me. Well, we made it this big, and now it's N times that big, and it's 1,000 times that big, and it's faster and faster and faster. And I made reference earlier to the Stochastic Parrots paper written by Timnit Gebru and Margaret Mitchell and Emily Bender, and the fourth person I always, I apologize, forget. And they complained at the time, a couple of years ago, that this rush to make ever bigger models is a mistake because it can't be audited, it can't be tracked and traced, and it's kind of macho. And we go to smaller models. And if you listen to Jan LeCun at Meta, he talks about smaller models. He talks about different ways to learn, imagining it's a 3-year-old learning language or learning movement. And so I think that brings it back into a human scale of conception, whereas today it blew all that apart. It's just, my God, it is bigger upon bigger upon bigger upon bigger. And that's what he wants as a business.
Right. Yes. It's very capitalistically minded in the background, even if it's not just ego, just that idea of, yes, a company who makes its money by selling these is obviously going to try to imagine doing more and more and more and getting you to invest in more and more and more.
Right. The last thing that strikes me is the relationship with his customers somewhat befuddles me.
Yeah.
He brags about the advances of Transformer, but he gives no credit to Google for that. He talks about the digital double. What do you call it?
The digital twin.
Thank you, twin. Close. And as you pointed out many times, that's kind of Microsoft's phrase. And yes, he mentions the customers, and yes, he mentions what they're doing, but he also is competing with them in creating models. And I don't understand the business well enough to get the full dynamics of that. I gotta think there's some trouble here that they think at Nvidia, you all need us, but Google makes its own chips too. Apple makes its own chips too. I don't know that and there's other competitors out there, and Nvidia is doing, Lord knows, it's doing extremely well. It's amazing. But at what point does hubris tear them down?
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah, I'm still very confused about it as well. Specifically in that area, I went to some of the pages that were mentioned, the ai.nvidia.com, to learn more about the NIMs in particular, which was that thing they were talking about with their own AI models. But what's interesting is all of the models that they are, I'm going to use a strange verb here, nimming, are actually models from other companies. So it's Stability AI's SDXL Turbo, it's Google's Gemma 7B, it's Meta's Llama 2 that you're actually interacting with, it's Stability's AI Stability Video Diffusion. So it's almost as if what NVIDIA is providing is the platform on which to sit some of these open models, maybe, as opposed to being them creating models of their own. So that may have just been because, again, we talked about how it was all kind of couched in jargon. It may have been a misunderstanding.
I don't know. I don't understand that because it sounded to me at one point that he was talking about them making their own models.
Right.
And so I don't understand it well enough to know what's going on and kind of what their market position is. Versus others. And, finally, it's amazing, too, to think about the world used to be owned by Intel and Intel inside, and now it's NVIDIA inside everything.
Yeah, and they want to remind us of that. I think that's what today was about. You saw all of the companies mentioned, SAP being one that, as NVIDIA pointed out themselves, runs a lot of the stuff behind the scenes at NVIDIA too. That's a company that has deep roots in so much. So learning that, they're using NVIDIA in many ways. There were some different kind of terms, verb phrases that were used that's still very confusing to me. And I plan to kind of learn more about what it means, particularly early on when they were talking about being able to, oh goodness, now I'm forgetting what the terminology was, but essentially a company could accelerate their compute by working with NVIDIA in these specific ways. And it wasn't quite clear what that meant and what it meant to go forth with what NVIDIA was providing. So there was a lot of kind of...
CUDA accelerate?
Yeah, that's it. CUDA accelerate.
Accelerate, right.
Yeah.
Right.
So what that actually means in practice was not made clear, I feel, other than we'll make your compute even more computey. That was kind of the extent of it. So
just to say compute as a noun... Always, it's like I hate using gift as a verb.
Yeah.
It's give, not gift. It's give, right? And so now that compute becomes a noun, and how much compute you have, I understand it's shorter than saying computer power or something else.
The amount of compute in a thing, yeah.
But to me, it's a very recently popular phrase. I'm sure they've been using it in computer science for a long time. But now that AI comes, it's out there in language.
Yeah, it's just not clear, right? At least in the sense of everything else that this 2-hour presentation provided, there were times where I genuinely did feel a little lost by what was being said.
I fully admit it.
Yeah,
I was the wrong person to have here, except that I'm interested in this, but that's it.
That's what we both do. We're enthusiasts,
exactly.
Right?
Exactly. Omniverse, accelerated computing, guardrail it.
Oh, the
AI Foundry, everything that moves will be robotic. Those were some of the other phrases that I wrote down that struck me. And then, of course, the embarrassing moment, which I tweeted about, is when he said to Grace Hopper, "Good girl."
Oof.
That was oof.
Yeah, that was a bad moment there.
It was.
And I'm sure that will that will play out too. Interestingly, in many cases, there are still the Hopper CPU is still a part of this new GPU architecture, despite the upgrades to the Blackwell GPUs. A lot of that technology is kind of being updated in componentized areas, and ultimately, I remain curious at what companies can even afford some of the stuff that they were showing off today, because that
goes back to scale.
Yeah.
Right. I want to believe that open source models in AI brought down to the level of researchers in schools and startups will do amazing things. And I believe that will be the case, but there's this pressure for huge. And, you see these pictures of them multiplying servers upon racks upon things, and they can all talk to each other, and that's fine. And he's saying, you got to fill it with data then. And that creates an omnivorous, speaking of omni, hunger for data that's going to freak people out.
Yes, it will.
Data has become a bad word. And I think that's a problem, because data is knowledge at some point. But they're going to try to hoover up everything they possibly can. And the problem remains that what is available from those who had the power to publish and the power to create in the past. That is what makes these systems biased. And what we really should be talking about is what we add to them, what's missing from them. Not to feed their omnivorous, omniverses, but instead to find more diversity and value in how we present the world.
Yeah. Perhaps
to these machines.
Perhaps this is where it is a good opportunity. What we hear about what's upcoming and sort of what's underway right now. We just heard from OpenAI that they're training on publicly available video. And I think about all of the everyday people who that was kind of their first foray into online publishing, and how maybe that will better capture the zeitgeist, perhaps, TikTok publishing and YouTube videos and all of that, perhaps is a better representation of the state of the everyday person versus what I think you're saying, which is that, traditionally it's been things from the New York Times, which the New York Times has problems with, and all of those publications that exist on the web that have hold and form a large archive of what the internet is. Maybe this is going to make things a little bit more even in terms of where the
or that we have to do that intentionally.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah,
right, and
make that choice
exactly, and recognize what's not there and say we got to go for it. If you listen to Wikipedia, they do that regularly. They say we have a bunch of mainly white male, I think it's heavily male, Wikipedians who work their butts off and do amazing things.
They do great things, yeah.
But they recognize that because some people are missing from the core of Wikipedians, some things are missing in Wikipedia, and they have to intentionally go out and encourage other people to do this. And I think when we have this talk about generative AI and learning training sets and how the New York Times says, take our stuff down, all the publishers say, take our stuff down and put up paywalls for the machine. Well, what's the world we're presenting to the AI that's going to be out there making decisions, oftentimes that they shouldn't make?
Yeah, but will be
on a skewed view of the world. Mm-hmm. And so the responsibility to me that we don't talk about is what we have to add into all that. And that's, again, goes back to stochastic parrots. If you're dealing with smaller models, you can audit them, you can see what's there, and you can see what's missing. You get to the scale that he was talking about today.
You have to build AI to even come close to doing the task of auditing, and then it still doesn't give you, the human being, the full understanding of how.
There's no reasoning, and there's no judgment, and there's no sense of fact, and there's no sense of meaning.
Yeah.
There are other jumps here. He didn't talk about AGI per se. He did talk about one of the scales here was to learn and understand everything. And the first comes pattern, and then meaning, and then generation. And that's kind of the sequence that they have here. Well, there's a few things missing in there. Do you really understand meaning, machine? No, you don't. There isn't a sense of meaning. And so when you generate from something that doesn't have meaning. That's what generative AI does.
Right.
It doesn't have meaning. And because it sounds like us, we think it does. But as Emily Bender points out, we impute the meaning in what it produces. It has no sense of meaning. And so this entire industry thinks that it can find meaning, and it can't. Huh. And so if they'd slow down and fill in their gaps as well in the functionality, but instead they're just going blasting ahead with scale.
So do you think that it's even, is it possible for it to, to actually have that meaning, first and foremost? Secondarily, how do you determine that it does have meaning? And then I guess thirdly, it's almost a bit Schrodinger's cat situation where, like, by the observation of us as human beings to provide that meaning to it, that's what gives it the meaning. So then what is another, can it even be possible for it to have meaning if we don't ascribe meaning to it by giving it meaning? Wow. Yeah.
This is what fascinates me about all this. And what I like about this field is because it forces us to ask questions of ourselves as humans. Mm-hmm. We call it artificial intelligence. Well, what is intelligence? The New York Times starts to believe that AI has a self, which I know it doesn't have, but okay, what is a self? How would we know if it had it? Would we know if it has a sense of meaning? What's the test for that? The other part that always interests me is how these people make, and I didn't hear this today, but you hear it from the AI people, the AGI people, is the goal is to be human, is to duplicate a human function. I don't know that's the right scale for compute. I don't know that's the right judgment of its power and its ability. And so does it have to have a self? No, it doesn't. Can it do the things we want it to do? That's the real test here.
Right.
And we saw a little bit of that at the very end today where, oh, look, here's a neat car. We can design. We can show you stuff. But it's got to be done in the context of our desires. Damn it. We're in charge.
Yeah, I see what you're saying there. It's this idea that we're pushing for it to be human for what purpose exactly?
Yes.
When really all we want is a tool that can do the things that we need it to do in a new, conception. It is, I guess that's a little egotistical, huh?
Exactly.
That
yes.
human
that's exactly
is what it needs to be because that's the best thing it could be.
Right. But it could be, in some ways, immensely more, but in other ways, immensely less.
Yeah.
You're right. It's egotistical in two ways. One, that we become the basis of judgment. If you're as smart as us, then
you've done it.
Arrived.
Yeah.
However, but then the next piece is, if I'm the one who makes that machine that makes it smarter than us, then look how smart I was.
Yeah.
To do it.
Yeah.
Right. It's ego squared.
Wow.
That's why this is a fun field to talk about. And this is what, this is how I blather too with our friend Jason Howell on AIinside.show every Wednesday.
Head there.
Before a twig. And, we admit today, we don't know half of what he was talking about.
Right.
But it still affects us. And so we still can have a seat at this table to discuss it.
And we need to.
We have to.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because as you said, exactly, we are not the people. We need those people to create the stuff, but they're creating all of this stuff for the impact that it has on us and the tools that we will eventually have at our disposal. And so understanding as much of it early on, being aware of it, and then I think more importantly, helping to give other people the understanding such that we're all able to make informative decisions and make informative opinions about it is all very important because you're right. This is foot on the gas in so many ways. And when you just develop a base fear or misunderstanding of a thing that results in you being avoidant and sort of, that's over there and I'm not going to pay any attention to it. And then suddenly it smacks you in the face. No, we need more engagement. We need people to be aware of it so that we're all part of how this goes forward, especially if this is the next industrial revolution. This is the next new thing. It's got to be informed by everyone, not just the people with the CS degrees.
Amen to that. Exactly that. That's why I like Huang saying that we can stop training CS people and start caring about domain expertise. That goes to my heart. That's right. And he says that we can do that because the machine can listen and talk to us. I think that's correct. It can't get things right, but we can use our own language to command it, and that puts us back in charge. And I felt today a little loss of that power that he gave me only 2 weeks ago in that talk, but I think we can get it back.
Yeah. Well, this was a really good conversation. I appreciate you being here, Jeff Jarvis, to join me in talking about NVIDIA's GTC Keynote. If folks want to check out your other work, where should they go to do that?
Gutenberg.com with a discount code for Gutenberg and my other book magazine. Thank you very much for the plug opportunity.
You're very welcome.